After a long and depressing day at the office, I was finally able to switch off my computer and leave the office. It was completely dark outside, and the lights of the city were twinkling in the distance as if mocking me for being a late commuter. I lifted my bag and walked towards the lift, mentally contemplating how to explain my overtime work tonight. The lift doors slowly closed and I looked at my reflection, my tired face making you wonder if I was dreaming. I pressed the 1 floor button and the lift began to move downwards, making a faint humming sound. When the lift reached the ground floor, the doors opened and I almost stumbled in the cold wind. The security guard at the entrance of the building nodded to me, and I nodded back, hurrying into the night. The streets were nearly empty, with only a few streetlights swaying in the cold wind. I wrapped my jacket tightly around me, trying to keep the chill of the night at bay. Walking down the empty street, only the sound of my footsteps echoed in my ears. Tonight is such an unusual night, I said to myself, trying to dispel the uneasiness in my mind. After walking for a few minutes, I noticed something strange. Every time I walked, I always felt like something was staring at me. I looked back and saw that the streets were empty, with only the shadows of a few bare trees swaying in the breeze. I smiled, thinking I was probably too tired to hallucinate. As I walked down a dimly lit alley, I heard a light footstep, as if someone was following me. I quickened my pace, and the footsteps quickened with it. I turned around sharply but saw nothing, only cold wind blowing from the depths of the alley with a hint of eerie flavor. I continued to walk forward, but the uneasiness in my heart grew stronger. Suddenly, a cold hand grabbed my shoulder. I turned around in fear and saw a strange man in a black trench coat standing in front of me. His face was hidden in the shadows and only a pair of icy eyes could be seen. "What are you looking for?" the man asked in a low voice, his voice husky and cold. I'm just going home," I stammered in reply. "You shouldn't be here," he said coldly, releasing my shoulder and turning to disappear into the darkness. I froze in place, my mind reeling. It took a few seconds before I came back to my senses and pulled myself together and ran. After running a few blocks, I finally saw a convenience store with warm, bright lights. I rushed into the shop, panting, and said to the clerk, "Someone's following me." The clerk's eyes widened, clearly taken aback by my appearance. He handed me a bottle of water, which I took and gulped down hard. "Are you okay?" the clerk asked with concern. "I don't know," I gasped, my heart still beating as fast as a drum. The clerk helped me call the police, who arrived a short time later. I described the man to them, but the police patrolled the neighborhood a few times and didn't find anyone suspicious. Eventually, they advised me to go home and said they would step up patrols in the area. After the police left, I still felt unsettled, but could only continue walking in the direction of my home. The night was getting deeper and deeper. There were fewer and fewer pedestrians and vehicles on the road, and my pace was getting faster and faster, almost like a trot. Finally, I saw the light of home. At that moment, it was as if I saw a ray of hope. I practically ran and rushed into the house, locking the door behind me with a long sigh of relief. I collapsed onto the couch as the sensation of my heart beating violently subsided. Just as I was trying to calm myself down, my phone rang. I picked up my phone and saw that it was a text message from an unknown number. The text message contained only one sentence: "You won't get away with this." I sat up violently, my heart racing once again. I looked around the room, trying to figure out what was out of the ordinary. But everything was normal in the room, so quiet that all I could hear was the clock ticking on the wall. I pressed the callback button, but the number said it didn't exist. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, and I felt that things were far from simple. I opened the curtains and looked out. Something seemed to be moving in the darkness. I stared into that darkness and felt a pair of cold eyes watching me. I hurriedly closed the curtains, picked up my mobile phone, and dialed my friend's number. I stammered out what had happened, and my friend comforted me on the other end of the line, saying that it was probably a prank, but still promising to come over right away to be with me. Every second waiting for my friend to arrive seemed like a year. I kept checking the doors and windows to make sure everything was locked, but the unease lingered in my heart. My friend finally arrived, and when I opened the door, I practically jumped into his arms. He comforted me for a few moments, then sat down and analyzed things with me. Could the person you're talking about be crazy? Or maybe you've offended someone at work in your day? My friend asked. I don't know. I shook my head, but that text makes me think he's really watching me. My friend suggested that I call the police and move in with him temporarily for a few days. I nodded and agreed with his suggestion. Just as we were about to leave the house, my mobile phone rang again. This time it was an unknown caller. I picked up the phone only to hear the other person's low voice say, "You'll never get away with this." I was so shaken that the phone fell to the ground. My friend hurriedly picked up the phone, but the other side had already hung up. "Let's go." My friend pulled me and rushed out of the house. Along the way, I always felt that there was a pair of eyes staring at us. I kept looking back, but I couldn't see anything. When we reached my friend's house, I still felt uneasy. We locked the doors and windows, but the feeling of being watched lingered. It was late at night, and my friend advised me to rest first, but I couldn't sleep. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, my mind constantly recalling the stranger's eyes and his words. Suddenly, I heard light footsteps coming from outside the door. I held my breath and listened carefully as the footsteps got closer and clearer. I reached for my bedside mobile phone and was about to call the police when the screen of my phone suddenly lit up, displaying a new text message. "I'm right outside your door." My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I gingerly walked over to the door and looked out the cat's eye, but there was nothing outside. Just when I thought I misheard, there was a sudden knock at the door. I took a few steps back, picked up my mobile phone, and shakily dialed my friend's number. My friend picked up the phone in the other room, and I whispered to him what was going on outside the door. He came right over and stood by the door with me, a baseball bat in his hand. "Who are you?" my friend asked loudly, his voice unusually loud in the stillness of the night. There was no response from the door, but we could hear footsteps fading away. My friend and I looked at each other and decided to open the door to find out what was going on. When we opened the door, it was empty, except for a note lying quietly on the floor. I picked up the note and there was only one sentence on it: "The game has just begun." My friend and I looked at each other speechless, the fear in our hearts reaching its peak. That night, none of us closed our eyes again and stood guard by the door until dawn. It was only when the first rays of the morning sun poured into the room that we felt a hint of safety. My friend accompanied me to the police station to report the incident, and the police started investigating the matter, but I knew that this was just the beginning. From that day on, my life was never the same. Whenever night falls, I always feel that there is a pair of eyes watching me from the shadows, ready to pull me into the endless darkness. I don't know when this horrible game will end, but I do know that I must always be on guard and not let fear consume me. It was as if life had turned into an endless nightmare, and I, for one, could only struggle to survive this nightmare.